Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is righteousness. And we're talking specifically about the righteousness that comes when we project our values on others, assuming that they are mutually held when they aren't necessarily. And then we judge people based on that or based on their response. And we get into this whole spiral of dynamics that are not necessarily ultimately in alignment with the very values we were projecting in the first place. So, what is it? It's a something web we weave. Good morning, Rosalind. Great to have you here with us this morning. Welcome. We're talking today about righteousness, and it'll be a fun conversation. But before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, all your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together and rub those palms together vigorously. Feel the friction, feel the temperature, the pressure, the energy, the tickling and tingling when you stop rubbing them together, and allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. Welcome. Good morning and good evening, Gia. Welcome. It's great to have you here with us. And today we're talking about righteousness, but in a particular context. So the context that we're talking about righteousness in is when we're present to our values. And this was an example from a conversation yesterday. Let's say our value is freedom. Our really high value that we operate from is freedom. The assumption is that value is commonly held. We tend to believe or assume that other people think and process and feel the way that we do, right? We just tend to believe that, of course they do, because we don't know any different. Right. So, I mean, that's how we perceive the world. We presume that others perceive the world the same way. So if freedom is my highest value, and I am projecting that or assuming that for someone else as well, and I am endeavoring to support them in achieving their freedom, and they are not valuing freedom the way that I do, and they don't respond the way that I expect them to, then how do I respond? And in this particular case, the person was like, well, next, or what's wrong with you? Or, like, I'm trying to support you and you're not receiving my support. And then there's indignation and a righteousness that arises. And it's a very, very interesting dynamic. So yesterday I was talking to a bunch of people and we were exploring kind of the dark side of our values. When we hold certain values and then we impose expectations on others in regard to those values, right? We expect other people to either hold the same values in common or to be respectful of the values in the same way. And oftentimes, well, the fact is that we don't all hold the same values. And even if we use the same words for the values that we hold, which isn't necessarily common, we don't necessarily mean the same thing. For instance, what you mean by freedom, and what I mean by freedom might be two entirely different things. It might show up in two entirely different ways in your life and in my life. And so I think it's a very interesting thing, because we can become indignant and righteous when also when we are trying to impose our values on others, because there are judgments that we use our values to measure, right? So values typically act as sort of a North Star for us, right? We get to use them to keep us on track. I've got something in my eye. However, we also, because we're using them as a guidepost, we measure others based on our own values too, right? So if I value honesty, like to the letter honesty, that might show up for me in a different way that honesty might show up for someone else. And if I witness somebody else not being honest, I may, well, actually, I'm going to use an example from yesterday because it was sort of a jarring example. It was interesting. So I have tended to talk to a group and say, you guys. And as we are moving into a more gender sensitive culture, you guys becomes less politically correct, right? And so I was talking to some folks and I said, it occurs to me that, I'm using the term you guys, and I want you to understand that it isn't gender related for me. And that it's just a collective term. And we got into a conversation about it, and I discovered that there was a lot of conversation going on for the people that I was talking to about this whole you guys thing. Like, it was not okay with them. And in fact, one of them said that they considered it just really lazy speaking. And I thought, okay, that's really interesting. So there was a judgment coming around, the value that they particularly held around gender. I'm going to say gender sensitive speaking, because I'm not defending you guys. I am open to re-educating myself around sensitivity to certain nuances of language that reflect bigger assumptions. And there was a really intense judgment that this was lazy speaking. And there was a righteousness in that assertion, right? Like, this is how it should be, and you're just being lazy to not recognize that, and not step up to that, and not embrace that. And so I know that judgment, that righteousness was not really in alignment with the other values held by that person. You know, when we're talking about creating equity, creating bridges and dialogue and all of that. And so it's interesting how, for myself too, and I just, this was a raw circumstance that just occurred, so that's why I used it rather than using my own examples of when I've been righteous about my assertions. Rosalind says that would be triggering. Well, I did say, ouch, you know, I was like, I'm experiencing the judgment of laziness here. You know, I was able to say that, which was awesome. And I think it's, we often don't realize how, well, I have an example that where I'm the guilty in air quotes party. So I had an experience where I was feeling very, very deeply disrespected, and I communicated that. And the way that I communicated it could have been a lot more respectful. But I was in an upset, and I was reactive, and I was righteous about it. And as a result, I wasn't in as deep alignment as I would have liked to have been with the values that I held, because I wasn't embodying the level of respect that I had hoped to receive. So I got indignant about it and righteous about it. And I'm using this as an example because I don't think that it is a rarity. I think it happens with us a lot, particularly when we feel that one of our values has been violated. And I actually did use the words that I felt violated, because I did. And as a result, the person that I communicated this to, because of the way I communicated it, and I don't know if there would be a way that I could communicate it where they wouldn't feel that way, but I communicated it in a way that they then felt violated, which wasn't the objective, but I didn't know how to avoid it. And so it's interesting how our values act as really powerful and important tools for guidance, growth, self-correction. And also they can be used as a bludgeon, you know, used as a weapon. And you know, especially like even politically, you can see that there are certain platforms running on family values, right? And the thing is that we want to be values based, right? We want to be living to our highest capability. And that means being connected to our values. And I'm wondering what kinds of practices can we put in place to enable ourselves to check ourselves, to be consistent in living through our values, like not get so lost in our own righteousness that we then impose our values on others, saying, well, obviously this is an important value. Maybe somebody else has a different priority and it shows up differently in their lives. Who am I to tell them what their value should be? I'm wondering if this is connecting for you in any way. Like if you see places in your life when, like maybe you value hard work. And this has been a really interesting conversation actually with clients too. Things have to be hard. Maybe you value the fact that you have incredible determination and can overcome all kinds of obstacles. And maybe there are other people that just say, you know what? I'm going around the obstacles. I don't want to deal with them. Or they deal with them in an entirely different way. Or let's say you really value being on time and somebody else just doesn't hold that same value. You can make being on time about, like if somebody's late, well, that's really disrespectful, and you can have all kinds of stories about it, right? But if the other person doesn't value being on time, or they don't get it, they don't see it the same way you do, whatever your righteousness or upset, the likelihood is that there'll be an altercation around being late because it's not in alignment with your values. So this is where the righteousness comes in, right? Like, of course I'm right. Of course, if you're late, it means you're disrespectful. But it's not, of course, for everybody. Even if we make certain agreements, it's really, really, really interesting stuff. So Gia says, I value transparency, but I see my son doesn't at all. And I have now learned to keep calm and understand him as is. Luckily, my husband equally respects and values transparency in a relationship. Wow, Gia, thank you so much for sharing that. So maybe it's not that your son doesn't value transparency. Maybe he values privacy. And maybe privacy and transparency look like they conflict. Interesting, right? Like someone who values privacy may look like they're secretive, but maybe they just are private. And is being secretive the same as being private? Is private being the same as being secret, holding secrets? Interesting conversation. What does transparency look like? Does it mean I share everything? Does it mean I speak all my feelings all the time? Does it mean what does it mean? Gia says, wow, well said. Thank you for it. Yes, he's private about his life. So, that might open an opportunity, recognizing that he values privacy. That might open an opportunity for conversation to say, oh, it occurs to me that you value your privacy. What does that mean for you? What does it look like to be private? What does it look like to respect your privacy? And how does this notion of transparency feel for you in relation to privacy? Because it might feel like it's really invasive and intrusive. It's just like, let me do my life. And I get to make my own decisions. Or maybe it's funny because my parents used to recount a story to me about me at like 3 years old saying, I want my piracy, which meant privacy. And I'm guessing that I picked that up from a parent. However, I as much as I share, I'm a private person. You know, my life is private, and I share the things that I choose to share. So it's interesting too. This is a conversation that I had, I think yesterday as well, talking about how, because this dynamic was present for somebody else that I was talking to, how, you know, I share a lot very freely, but what I share on my terms. And people might construe it as I'm an open book. And in certain respects I am, because I kind of see my life as a canvas that, like I can learn from and I can share learnings, but I'm also private. And that may seem like a paradox, but in response to what you're talking about regarding transparency, Gia, I kind of see that transparency and privacy can coexist. Like I kind of see, and it may seem paradoxical, but it feels like in me, they kind of coexist, is privacy, and I get to share things on my terms, if that makes sense. Yeah. And it could look like secrecy, but you can also be looking at, is it really your business? This is really interesting too, because this conversation that I referenced was about someone sharing the intimate details of their lives, like in terms of, almost on the level of what they bought at the grocery store. And I was saying, you know what, I really don't need to hear that. I don't need to know what you bought at the grocery store. I don't need to know what side of the bed you woke up on to be able to care about you, or to be able to be engaged in your life, to be caring about you and the quality of your life. What you bought at the grocery store is not necessarily the level of relationship that I'm looking for. If you're talking about how it was challenging making certain decisions because you're looking at certain existential questions when you're in the grocery store trying to decide what to buy, and it gave you a bigger awareness of the context of the world, that I'd be really interested in hearing about. Otherwise, I don't really care about your visit to the grocery store unless something extraordinary happened there. And it's not because I don't care about you. It's just that, your trip to the grocery store and my trip to the grocery store, there's more interesting things, like it's a level of mundane conversation that I just don't see the need to be sharing that, for example. So Gia says, yes, striking a discussion with him on his definition of privacy instead of believing my imagined definition of his privacy. Exactly, Gia, because you don't know what his perspective is, and unless you ask him, right? We just assume. We assume that we understand each other, and even though we use the same words, it doesn't mean that we do. And Rosalind says, is righteousness related to a previous topic, misguided loyalties? That's good for you, Rosalind. That's a challenging question. That's interesting. I would imagine that there could be a connection. As I'm thinking of it in this moment, I'm guessing you saw a connection. I'd be interested to hear what the connection is that you noticed. Because I'm not sure that that in this second, I see a clear relationship, but, interesting, because with the misguided loyalties, one of the first things that comes up is, I'm gonna join you in the struggle. And I'm trying to overcome my experience of struggle in my life. So if my connection with you is bound with struggle, then, like that level of loyalty, I think, is misguided. I could then redefine the level of our relationship in instead of joining you in the struggle, maybe transforming the struggle together, for instance. But I'm not sure where righteousness comes into that, unless I'm imposing my sense of loyalty to a misguided loyalty on you. I'm not really sure. Maybe you have an insight around that you'd like to share, which would be awesome. Anyway, it's interesting to me how there's a yin and a yang pretty much to pretty much everything. And so, Gia says, to me, transparency means sharing my challenges or my passion or spontaneity, not having to think each time before answering. Yes, unnecessarily hiding things or maintaining secrets is what causes stress in relationships, as per me. And I am ready to learn new ways. And I think even that can happen when we're open to discuss or talk about it. Good morning, Jenny. Welcome. We're talking about righteousness and values, and Gia just was talking about transparency and privacy. So one of the things with kids that why kids might maintain their privacy is because they are, or people might hold their views to themselves or whatever, because they're trying to avoid judgment or attempts at control. So if I share, like, there are certain dreams and visions I don't share with people, or I share with very select people. Why? Because other people seem to feel that it's okay to take license with giving me their opinion on something that I didn't ask for an opinion around. Particularly when you're nurturing a new vision or a dream, you get to be really careful how you share it with people, because there are people out there that are dream killers. They consider that it's their job to play devil's advocate. They believe that it's their job to shoot things down. Or they believe that it's their job to give their opinion and their judgment. And if you know that this other person doesn't hold the same values that you hold, and you share something and then they judge you, it's like, why, what is the benefit of that? Maybe there could be a benefit potentially if there were a way to expand your perspective through that. But I think that particularly in families, we get into certain dynamics. I'm not saying you're guilty of this at all, Gia. I'm just saying that maybe your son is kind of keeping his own counsel about certain things because maybe he doesn't want input unless he invites it. And it can look secretive because somebody's just saying, hey, I'm doing what I want to do. I don't, I'm not asking for your input. It's like and especially from parents, children often feel like people are trying to control them. And this was really interesting, is at a lunch, a brunch with a younger person and who I hadn't seen for a long time, and some other people, and they had their phone and they were watching the game on their phone. And I said, oh, please, could you just be with us? And they got really bent out of shape and said, you didn't have to say that to me. You didn't have to do that. You're not my mother. And I said, I didn't say it or mean it in a punitive way. It's just that we haven't seen you for so long, and I would so love to be able to be with you. So my thought is that around this privacy thing is some of that kind of dynamic. And so Jenny is saying, dictating your life and guide you on their path, not your own. Like, this is something that happens in the context of families, right? Parents often do that and being well-meaning. I'm not saying that there's any malicious intent in that. It could be very well-meaning to be providing guidance like it was not like put away your phone, me demanding that. It was like, oh, please be here, I want to be with you. Like it was coming from an entirely different place. So Jenny says people like to control others, and Jenny says he keeps it to himself, so there aren't any expectations to meet or disappoint. And that can be too. It's like if I share my dreams and visions and then I don't fulfill it and somebody keeps asking me about it. Like, I remember I used to share certain things with my mom, and she would then keep following up with me to say, well, how's that going? How's that going? And if I hadn't followed through or I switched direction, then that became a thing. It became like one more failure in my experience, like that. So better just to do it and then have the result or not, and just be accountable to it myself, rather than having to navigate somebody else's judgments or opinions about it. Like I would say, well, I'm going to do this, or this, and then I would get a response like, we'll see. It's like, like somebody's watching and judging and keeping score for me. So I've learned to keep my own counsel in many regards, and also be selective about who I share things with. And it doesn't mean I'm being secretive. For me, it means I'm being discerning. I'm private and I'm being discerning. So Jenny says, yep, my sister did, and so did my friends. Me as a people pleaser would piss them off because I consciously did the exact opposite of what they advised. So yeah, so there can be blowback, right? If you're talking to people, and oftentimes people give unsolicited advice even with the best intentions, even coming from a place of love and respect. And sometimes it's just not welcome. So that may be one dynamic. And And I think that kind of thing occurs more readily with parents, even though the intentions may be really well-meaning, because the parents have also been the people to discipline things and to guide things. And Gia says, oh, thank you, Jenny, for your input. Well done, Jenny. I agree. So yeah. Anyway, that's it for this morning. We were talking about righteousness. Jenny says it suppresses learning and growth, judgment and righteousness, right? And imposing our values on others too. And there's a difference between imposing your values on others and inviting others to join you in your values, right? Gia, you're so welcome. And everybody else who's joining us, it's such a pleasure to have you guys. There I am, see you guys. To have you folks all here and contributing and being willing to engage in these conversations and looking at things a little more deeply from different angles. And ultimately what that creates for us, hopefully, is greater sense of freedom and possibility. So that's it for today. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. And I invite you to check out the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Network, EWN One with the Earth, Enlightened World Living. And Jenny, thank you. Jenny says, have a beautiful day. Wishing all of you a beautiful day. And again, so much love and appreciation and really, truly deep gratitude. I look forward to seeing you again here really soon.